When we return, the countdown continues with the top 10 achievements of the 20th century. Number 10.
You're doing very well.
The room-sized ENIAC, built in 1945, was one of the first computers.
Before that, they would have a room with young women who were sitting down there doing computations with paper and pencil, and they were called the computers. Now they had something that worked at even lower wages because all you had to feed it was electricity, and it could do the computations much faster.
A half-century later, a quarter-inch microprocessor, a computer on a chip, is far more powerful than ENIAC and much cheaper. As computers have miniaturized, learned our languages, and begun to think, the uses have exploded.
I regard the word processing aspects of computer as one of the glorious inventions of modern times.
The kind of society that we're running now, with its enormously complex interactions, just would not be possible at all without computers.
We're moving into a new age, and the computer revolution will be even more deep-running transformation than the Industrial Revolution.
9. The dream of soaring like a bird is an ancient and powerful one. The changes brought about when that dream became reality have transformed the planet. On December 17, 1903, the Wright brothers set out to prove the gasoline-powered machine they'd designed could fly. In a world where horses were still the main form of transportation, Orville Wright, a 32-year-old bicycle mechanic, seemed mad even to attempt the stunt.
From when the very flimsy Wright brothers aeroplane, bits of wood and cotton canvas first lifted off the ground at Kitty Hawk, the potential of it wasn't realized. Flight has shrunk the world in ways unimaginable. You can leave London in a Wanda Concorde and arrive in New York at a slightly earlier time than you left.
No corner of the earth remains unchanged by flying machines.
It's an astonishingly swift progress from that little bumpy ride on the North Carolina beach.
8.
Around the turn of the century, if a child was running a high fever, there was a very high likelihood that the child would die. There was very little you could do. You really didn't have any medicine. More people died from influenza, the epidemic of 1918, than were killed in action during World War I. It isn't the influenza itself that directly killed. It was the secondary pneumonia infections that followed. But there wasn't any specific treatment.
But in 1928, a petri dish in the lab of Scottish bacteriologist Alexander Fleming was contaminated by a mold that happened to drift in from a mycology lab on the floor below. Fleming noticed that the mold was producing a substance that was killing the infectious staph bacteria he'd been growing. Realizing the substance, which he named penicillin, might have medical applications, he kept the rare mold alive. Not until 10 years later did a team of Oxford University researchers figure out how to extract the penicillin from Fleming's mold in large quantities and prove it could be safely used to knock out bacterial infections. It was the world's first antibiotic.
Today, if our child is sick, we take that child to the doctor to get some kind of pill or liquid, and within 24 hours, she's up and running around.
The lives of countless people have been saved by an arsenal of antibiotics offering miraculous cures. 7.
In the early part of the century, 85% of the Earth's surface was colonized, controlled not in their own best interest by a more powerful industrialized nation.
They didn't want to be servants of long-distance masters. These people wanted to be masters of their own fate.
People like Gandhi in India began to agitate, and by the end of the Second World War, the colonial powers had been so beaten down by the war, it just broke the system much faster than anybody expected.
Within a generation, there were 60 new independent nations. Today, only 17 territories remain in the world.
What people have won by getting themselves free of the colonial power has been, above all, a feeling of self-worth. As they began to take on some form of self-government, they could feel that people like themselves were capable of doing anything.
6.
At the turn of the century, it was assumed a woman would be a wife and a mother. Women who wanted to work faced very large obstacles. Many times, if the jobs were open, they were only open to single women.
There were very powerful women's groups fighting for their rights, but there was tremendous opposition.
The most important thing for women in the 20th century was, of course, getting the vote. The surprising thing is that it took so long.
The women were trapped in stereotypes. They were not mechanical, they didn't have enough intelligence, their place was in the home.
In the early 60s, they were earning about half the pay of men for doing equal work. Women were barred from entering so many professions. When you look back at the progress that's been made, it's extraordinary.
5.
Prior to the Civil Rights Movement, black people lived in an almost exclusively self-contained world.
I traveled to the United States in the 50s and was astonished to find I could not play chess with a black man or invite him to my hotel for a coffee.
The Declaration of Independence said all men are created equal. The great shame of the United States, the foul stain upon our history, is racism, the injustice we have done to non-white peoples.
For almost 60 years, a policy of separate but equal was legal, even according to the Supreme Court.
And what the Civil Rights Movement was about was giving us the opportunity not to be treated unfairly or to receive things unduly, but to be allowed to compete person to person, same point on the starting line, with our peers, not just our black peers, but our American peers.
Even after segregation was finally ruled illegal in 1954, when 9 African-American teens tried to enroll in all-white Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, President Eisenhower had to call out the National Guard to protect them.
We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men...
America as a whole was enormously fortunate. There arose a leader of real vision, and a vision which encompassed not just blacks, but everybody.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
I haven't seen anyone before and anyone since who had that charisma, that intelligence, that voice, the capacity to name a people's dreams and aspirations, to motivate normal, regular African Americans to put their lives on the line to fight white racism and segregation. And until that happened, segregation wasn't going to go away.
In the spring of '63, when the police commissioner of Birmingham in Alabama set barking dogs and fire hoses against a nonviolent march. And that was televised all over the country, and it really shocked people. That made possible the passage of civil rights legislation. Martin Luther King has made the most effective challenge to the bad conscience of the white majority.
It's the first time in American history that a group of people used civil disobedience to insist upon and achieve their political rights.
If you believe in democracy, and if you believe in equal rights, and you believe in justice, all people should receive the same treatment and the same opportunity. It's a moral imperative of democracy.
That one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream. We shall